course, which is going to feature a talk by Andrea and Morgan. We're thrilled to have you all at the museum for this conference. But before turning the talk over to Ms. Morgan, please, I'd like to just make a couple clerical notes. The session is going to run for an hour and 10 minutes, and we're going to try to build in time for questions and answers at the end. During the session, please help yourself to refreshments. They're located out in the hall. And if you should need it, the nearest bathroom is located in the Herrick lobby, which if you go down the hall, take a left and then, or take a right and then take a left at the Apollo, you'll find the restroom. If you have any questions at all, either after, about the conference in general, you can ask myself or our room steward, Stacy Krupke. In the extremely unlikely event of any kind of emergency, Ms. Krupke will give you instructions on exiting the building. Thank you again for your participation in the conference. And please give me help me give a hand to Andrea Morgan, our first presenter.
Thank you. It's nice to see everybody this morning. Thanks for choosing my session over the session on John Dewey. That was a session that I would like to be at, so maybe if we get out early, we can go see what's happening down the hall. My session today is called Art Plus History, and this is a tour that we do at the Grand Rapids Art Museum, where I'm from. So I think we will just sort of jump right in. I wanted to start off our session with a quote that I think ties in well to the keynote that we just listened to, called "The eye must learn to see as the tongue learns to speak." And this is a quasi-famous quote from the French philosopher Denis Diderot. And what he's basically saying here is, we spend a lot of time, effort, and energy speaking. We sort of learn how to speak from our parents, but then we go to school and we have speech classes and we have literature classes and we learn how to speak and we learn how to write. And sight is sort of taken for granted. It's something that we always do, but nobody really tells us how we should be looking, how we should be seeing the world around us, or how we should be looking rather than just seeing. So we're going to start off with the importance of visual literacy. It was recently Halloween, and my husband and I have a tradition of watching one Halloween night, or one Halloween movie every night in the month of October. So one night we were sitting watching Nosferatu, a very wonderful silent film from 1922, loosely based on the Dracula novel. It's not actually based on the Dracula novel because the widow of the writer would not allow. So loosely based, right? So I pulled two screenshots, the one on the left and the one on the right. So if we look at the one on the left, you'll notice that it's tinted blue, and the one on the right is tinted yellow. Why do you think that is?
Make it more scary.
To make it scarier? Okay, what else?
Possibly to signify day versus night.
To signify day versus night. So in 1922, as they are filming, if you get a script and it says exterior night, well, in 1922, there is no way you would take a camera outside at night and film. You just wouldn't be able to capture anything. The technology wasn't there, the lighting wasn't there. So what they did, they filmed everything during the day, sort of high sun during the day, and then once it was filmed, they would tint it blue at night or yellow to indicate an interior scene at night, to simulate something being illuminated by candlelight. So to an audience in 2014, this looked very strange to me. To me, this didn't necessarily symbolize night or interior night, because I see movies where we can actually film at night now. But to an audience in 1922, these were visual cues that, again, weren't really taught in a formal way, but were taught as sort of pop culture. They saw it all the time, and they sort of understood that that's what was happening. So this is an instance of how visual literacy was important then, and it's important now when we go back and we watch an old silent film. So the next time you're watching a silent film and you see the film being tinted like this, you'll know why. Another interesting case is they're not all tinted this way, because they, in many cases, were hand tinted. Different copies are tinted in different ways. Not to mention the fact that there are only a few copies of this specific movie available. they can be tinted in lots of different ways. So there was also a bit of artistic liberty taken with these different films in the ways that they were tinted. So moving on, at the Grand Rapids Art Museum, we had a tour called Surveying American Art. And this program was started in response to the national program called Picturing America. Is anyone familiar with that program? Okay, it was a program sort of initiated by the National Endowment for the Humanities to preserve and educate U.S. citizens and U.S. children about the importance of American art and culture. So what you could do is you could apply for a grant as an educator, and you could get monies to not only supply your classroom with lots of curriculum and big, huge posters of reproductions of works of art, but you could also have money for buses and field trips. So this was a very great program. It was right in line with the social studies curriculum. We had history teachers using reproduction of artworks in their classroom to teach historical events throughout history. It was great. Well, at the Art Museum, we decided to create a specialized tour experience to sort of piggyback off of that. So we created this program called Surveying American Art, where we would build on the curriculum of Picturing America using our collection. So the reproductions are great and wonderful, but for those of us in museums, we know that we like to privilege the authentic art object. So we created this program where children would come into the art museum, they would look at our works of art, it would align with their curriculum, and then they would do a hands-on workshop. Well, unfortunately, the last grant round for this particular Picturing America program ended in 2008, and in 2010 was the last time grant money was distributed. So, after there is no more money left, we saw a huge decrease in the amount of people coming to the museum. As a museum worker, any of you who work with tours, particularly school tours, we are vying for that maybe one field trip spot that teachers get to take their kids to. So it's difficult for a teacher to go to an administrator and say, can we go to the art museum? Because it seems like art doesn't necessarily fit into the curriculum as well anymore. Going to a zoo, going to an aquarium, going to a nature center, something like that seems to align more closely, particularly when the school has to pay for it. So because we saw this huge decrease in grant funding, we saw that mirrored in our tour numbers. So we decided to do something about it, and we revamped the Picturing America tour program and called it Art Plus History. To create this program, we started with our original Picturing America program. It was a strong program, it was written very well, teachers just weren't as interested in it anymore. So we used that as a basis, but we invigorated it by focusing primarily on visual literacy and visual literacy skills. We believe at the Grand Rapids Art Museum that visual literacy is sort of the building blocks of enjoying works of art. So we infused this tour with visual learning strategies as well. We also looked at the social studies curriculum to make sure that if a teacher went to their administrator and said, we would like to go to the art museum, they could sort of pull out the social studies standards and say, this tour meets X, Y, Z of these social studies standards. We also talked to our docents who gave the Picturing America tours and asked for their input in terms of what they might change, what they think could be improved and things like that. And of course we talked to teachers, asking them what they needed, what they wanted, what they felt would be successful for this new and improved tour experience. So the objectives for the Art Plus History tour are by using Graham's collection and temporary exhibitions, we introduce the concepts that strengthen visual literacy, such as elements of principles of art and design and the difference between representational and abstract art. We also use these works as primary source documents. In this way, the students will learn to interpret the artist's intentions. Just as a history student might use a travel log or diary or some other sort of text as a primary source document, we like to use paintings or authentic art objects as primary source documents as well. You can use them in a similar way to sort of decode the contextual situation that the artist was living in, why they painted it the way that they did, what made them include certain aspects, things like that. And then the most important part that teachers really sort of cling to for this tour is this last objective, where students will learn to identify time and place through their observation. So by using elements and principles of design to sort of decode what they're seeing, teaching them how to look intently and observe a work of art, then they can start to make interpretations and evaluations as to time and place. So you're really getting to the core of that. How do I determine how to use this as a primary source document? Any questions so far? All right, that was the boring part, sort of getting into it. So we will skip right to the fun stuff. I'd like you to take a look at this painting and tell me what's going on here. Yes?
Birds are migrating.
So we have, up here. Okay, I'm gonna do it docent style right up here. So we've got birds migrating right up here. What else is going on here? Birds nesting up here. Okay, what else?
Individuals in a canoe crossing the water.
We've got people in a canoe crossing the water. What else?
We also have a couple of different groups of people on land in the trees. I don't know whether they're watching the birds or they're hunting.
So we have some people over here, possibly watching the birds, possibly hunting. Okay, what else?
Sunset.
Sunset, what makes you say it's sunset?
Looks like sunset to me.
Okay,
Color.
the color? What about the color makes you say sunset?
Lighter
Golden.
in the west.
Golden, so it's lighter in the west. Which way is west? So I'm from Colorado, there's no mountains in this picture, so it's hard for me to determine any direction at all. But we can assume on one end of the work it's lighter, so we're thinking sunset, sort of golden hues. All right, what else?
It's in an isolated area, because there's really no buildings.
It's in an isolated area, and you say that because you don't see any buildings. So we don't see any buildings on the horizon line, you don't see buildings here in the foreground, so we're in an isolated space.
And the water is calm.
The water is calm, okay? What does that mean to you, that the water's calm? How can that help us figure out where we are?
It has a sort of swamp feeling to me. It looks
Okay.
like some of the trees are actually growing out of the water.
Okay, back here, is that what you're saying?
And also in
Or
the,
here?
I can't, from where I am, it looks like there's a vertical, yeah, and that looks like it may actually be coming up out of the water, but I'd
Okay.
have to be closer.
We're definitely very close to a water source. It's sort of a calm water, so we're not thinking it's the ocean perhaps, or even one of the Great Lakes that has waves. Something that could maybe be a shallower lake or a smaller lake or a very calm stream or even a swamp. Okay, what else?
Well, you have diagonal cutting the painting
Mm-hmm.
crosswise.
Here,
Yeah. The,
or this one?
yeah,
Okay.
from top left to bottom right. And then you have the birds on the right creating a very orderly pattern. And then on the left, you have birds creating a chaotic
Mm-hmm.
pattern.
Yeah, so the artist definitely cuts this painting in half with this very strong diagonal here, and he shows the birds in two different ways. On this side, we have sort of chaos, as you said. There are birds everywhere. They're in the trees, they're on the ground, they're sort of in mid-flight here. And then here we have the birds in this very orderly formation as they are flying. What else?
It kind of makes me think of the fall season because of how there are so many birds together. I see a lot of that.
So it makes me think of the fall. So are you thinking of the migration, sort of where birds all get together and they fly south? So it makes you think of the fall, okay?
Colors are fall.
The colors seem to be fall. We have that gold hue that you were talking about before that makes us think about fall.
And trees without leaves.
Trees without leaves, yeah, we have this big tree here, this one here doesn't have any leaves on it. A lot of them are missing their leaves. So again, this could point us to fall as well. One principle of design that I'd like to point our attention to is that of rhythm. What does the artist use here to emphasize rhythm?
Maybe that would be the grouping of the birds, so you have 4 or 5 in a row on
So-
one branch, 4 or 5 flying.
The groupings of the
Circular
birds.
grouping.
Yeah, if you were to think of a name of this painting, what would it possibly be?
Waiting for migration.
Waiting for migration, okay. Something about birds, surely. There are a lot of birds in this image. Is anybody a bird connoisseur? No, okay, great, then I won't mess it up. So this bird, does it look familiar to anybody? Could you name it, perchance?
Maybe a heron of some sort?
Heron, okay.
No,
Anybody
I'm not a
else?
bird person.
Pheasants? Pigeons, yes. These are pigeons. The reason why you are having a hard time naming these birds is because they're extinct. So this is the passenger pigeon, which went extinct exactly 100 years ago, went extinct in 1914. And it's a little bit of a cautionary tale that we tell in Michigan. I'm not sure how the passenger pigeons affected the Toledo area, but in Michigan, there were so many passenger pigeons that the sky would be blacked out when they flew overhead. That's how many passenger pigeons there were. Think like locusts and like biblical plague amounts of pigeons. And so the artist sort of gets at that a little bit here and a little bit here. So many pigeons. They were so prevalent, in fact, that nobody ever thought that they could be overhunted and killed. However, as pigeons go, have you ever encountered a pigeon on the street, anything? Pigeons are real dumb. These pigeons, real dumb. So you can't really see from where you are, but this group pointed out here where you thought that they were on the ground maybe looking at the birds. They actually have big sticks. And they're using those sticks to hit the birds out of the trees. The birds would fall on the ground, and then they would just pick them up, put them into baskets, and cart them off. This is why they went extinct. The trees that you noted, they don't look like that because it's fall. They look like that because the pigeons are ruining the forest because there are so many of them. There's so many of them that they're killing the trees between their nesting and then what happens when lots of birds are in trees and they nest and the floor gets all covered in gross pigeon leavings. So these were a nuisance, but we did hunt them to their extinction. So when the artist was painting this, he actually painted this about 50 years after the extinction. And he used taxidermy pigeons that were in his studio to get them exactly right. He wanted to get them as close as he could. He could remember these pigeons from his boyhood, but he really needed that object, that reference there so that he could paint them correctly. And he also remembered from his boyhood this idea of them sort of blacking out the sky, so he included that as well. So when we do the stop on tours, that tends to be the place where we get to. This idea that we know that this painting takes place before 1914, because that is when the pigeon was extinct. And if you were able to see in better detail the people's clothes, you could sort of see that they were of a different time and place. This wagon is horse-drawn, so it's not an electric car. They're in a wooden canoe. All of those things point to time and place. Same thing with the fact that there are no buildings, as was pointed out, also gets the kids to this idea of a time and a specific place. there any questions about this? Okay, moving on. So tell me what's going on here.
Artist working by the water.
This guy here, what makes you say he's an artist?
Tried us on easel.
Right.
Yes.
Little easel there. Okay. What else is going on?
It's in the summer, blue sky, leaves on the trees,
Makes us think it's summer. We've got blue skies, leaves on the trees,
water's flowing.
water's flowing. All right, it's a nice time of year. What else?
Sun is coming from the upper left.
The sun is coming from up here, sort of shining in. Okay.
She's on the downgrade of a river, so the water is coming down, so she may be in a bit of a mountainous area.
Okay, so it looks like the stream or the river is sort of coming this way. So you're thinking that perhaps it sort of grades up like that? Okay.
It looks like a worn path coming down to where he's set up,
Mm-hmm.
indicating maybe it's a popular tourist spot.
Oh, so perhaps this person didn't just sort of trek out into the woods and found this picturesque spot. Perhaps this is a famed spot, a spot where people are all the time. Okay. What else?
But birch trees, that would be more northern.
These trees? Birch trees, northern, like where? Michigan, perhaps? Okay. Definitely US, I'm thinking. Okay.
Painted in more of a realistic style.
Okay, a realistic style. What makes you say realistic?
The detail, I guess the detail is painted in, it's not
Mhm.
as loosely painted as if it was like non-representational.
Sure, so we're thinking, this is more realistic, definitely not impressionism, for example. The details are rendered in a way that makes us say that is a tree, and the artist meant to paint that as a tree. It's not an abstracted tree, it's not the impression of a tree, that is a tree. Okay? What about the lines that the artist used? What can you tell me about those?
There's a lot of verticals in painting of the trees,
A lot of verticals in this painting.
and the rock face that's on the right. And then there's diagonals cutting across with the river and the slope of the ground on the left.
So we have lots of verticals here, as well as this rock face. And then the diagonals sort of come this way. Okay. What effect do the vertical lines have?
Makes you look at the sky.
Makes you look up. Okay. How about the sort of diagonals that cross, like sort of this way and this way?
Seems to create movement of the water over the rocks and the waterfall.
It creates some serious movement, yeah. We have, the scene is really broken up. Imagine that that wasn't there, it would be really boring, right? We would have just all of these verticals. But by having the diagonal sort of slice through, gives our eyes some place to be.
It also leads you to the artist that's painting down in the corner, because it's so small
Mm-hmm.
that you see the top of the umbrella, but other than that, it's the diagonals that are leading your eye down towards him.
Yeah, these diagonals really help us find our little artist friend here. So let's talk about this guy. He's very, very tiny, right? Why do you think the artist made him so small?
For accentuating nature.
To accentuate nature? What
I was
else?
gonna say it makes it a portrait of nature that way.
It does, yeah. This is definitely simply a portrait of nature. Nature is the emphasis here. This little guy that was put in here, you'd be hard pressed to figure out who this guy was. This isn't a portrait of this man. This is an emphasis of the nature around him. What else about that?
Would the paper painting suffer much if the man were not there?
What do you guys think? If the man wasn't there, how does that change your perception of the painting?
I mean, I can't honestly see him from here.
Okay.
So I mean,
So for you, it's all the same all the way back.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
But I feel like, I mean, from here, I can't see the painter at all, but I see his parasol,
Mm-hmm.
I think.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And I mean, it gives scale,
Mm-hmm.
and it also, it makes me think about the, Hudson River Valley School with the guy in the foreground to create the sense of scale, but also to show civilization
Mm-hmm.
and to show the presence of a force that's ultimately gonna change.
Sure. So let's talk about the Hudson River Valley School a little bit. What you're alluding to is this idea of this supreme nature, what they call the sublime. And by painting a very small, tiny little man in there, it shows this supreme power of nature, this, like I said, the sublime. And what these painters were encountering, many of them were what we would call Americans, but they weren't born here. So they came from Europe, where their big stuff was all man-made. They had big, huge, amazing buildings and churches and things like that in Europe. Then they come to this country, and we have this sort of untouched wilderness, as they called it. And in this untouched wilderness, they saw that what we had here was geology. We had mountains, we had gorges, we had big, beautiful rock formations, we had trees that were millions of years old, all these things that they didn't encounter as much in Europe. So when they got here, they were sort of taken aback by that sublime power of nature. And in their paintings, first of all, they had to separate themselves from their European counterparts, so they had to paint something different, they had to paint something in a new way. So this became their sort of romantic relationship with nature, or this idea of romanticism. So when you were talking about this being portrayed in a realistic way, you're right on. These trees really are trees, they're meant to be trees. However, it's unlikely that this scene really exists or existed at the time. It's much more likely that an artist would go out into the wilderness, probably not as wildernessy as we would think. I think it's much more likely what you were saying, that they would go to places that were more picturesque, sort of vacation spots, as indicated by the trail here. And they would sketch a tree that had fallen across a river, or a particular rock face that they really thought was pleasing, or a particular clump of trees. And they would go back to their studio and they would collage it. They would put it together and make it this beautiful, idealistic tribute to nature. One of the things that you can tell that it's Hudson River Valley romanticized view of nature is this U-shaped composition. I've been hiking a lot and I've never seen so many U-shapes as you might see in a Hudson River Valley School show. They were everywhere apparently when these guys were painting. But this is another indication of a time and a place. So this is a very specific time in American history where painters were basically singing their love songs to the U.S. This new country, this new great place, loving nature, and this new romantic ideal about nature. Now, someone brought up the idea that even though this is a love song to nature, we still have this man here. And while in this painting, he's simply observing and he's painting the landscape around him, but some of the other more preachy Hudson River Valley School paintings, we see this idea of man trying to make nature to submit, or foreshadowing the fact that man is coming through with trains or deforestation or something like that. So at this point, the artists are still loving nature. They haven't really gotten to that point exactly yet, but this is another indication of a specific time and place. If you were closer, we would have been able to go into a discussion about this particular man, the clothes that he was wearing, the type of umbrella or parasol that he had, and even his painting tools and his easel and things like that. And that would have been another way that we could have decoded it a little bit. Same thing with this one. We would have been able to see in a little bit more detail that people especially tend to give away time and place very easily. So now that I've done 2 examples of this, I want to ask you what I did to get us to this point. So what did I do as the facilitator?
He asks these kind of open-ended questions that allow for everyone to look and see what they found, add to the conversation by what they see differently than what someone else is noticing.
Sure, so open-ended questions is a really good one. I usually start off with just what's going on here, what do you see here? For those of you who are excited about seeing Filipino win tomorrow, I am a student of BTS as one aspect of my teaching, so what's going on here is a great place to start always. So that is one of the keys here is the open-ended questions. I find that it's easier to figure out where people are, so to ask what they see, what's going on, and then sort of delve in by giving them the tools, by giving them the keys. What else did I do?
You implemented one of the elements of art when you talked about movement.
Sure.
So you caused us to think about movement, and you showed us where the movement was for people that didn't understand all of those elements of art. So there was an educational piece there.
Yeah, so, it's one thing to sort of pull out your elements and principles chart or your book or something like that and say, okay, these are the elements and these are the principles. We're going to talk about line and color and shape and movement and balance, proportion and shape and all those things would really tend to turn me off. So by interjecting it into the conversation as people brought it up is a great way to do it, because oftentimes when I started the talk and I was talking about visual literacy being something that we all see every day. We see lots of different things. You just may not have that vocabulary, and a group just may not have the vocabulary to talk about something in terms of line, something in terms of movement, something in terms of balance or harmony. So after someone brings that up, you can interject that vocabulary in and sort of show people how they can see it in the following work of art. What else?
And then from there, you used those elements and design principles to help kind of lead us to how it then interprets to the history, the time and place, so we can use those to direct it back to the primary resource aspect.
Right, exactly. So I like to start off with a conversation about the work of art, interject in those vocabulary points, what the artist was using to enlighten us to his or her perspective, and then go into the historical significance. So with the pigeons, very rarely do I have a 3rd grader say, those are passenger pigeons and they have been extinct since 2014. Because the whole problem is that none of us have ever seen a passenger pigeon. It's not like people do big traveling exhibitions of passenger pigeons like they do with dinosaurs. We all know that dinosaurs are extinct, but we also all know what dinosaurs look like. Nobody outside of the 3rd graders in Grand Rapids, Michigan knows what a passenger pigeon is, or that they are extinct, or even what they look like. So it takes a little while to get to that point, but that aha moment after you say that, it's really powerful in that space. An interesting note on passenger pigeons is they're trying to bring them back, Jurassic Park style, where they are sort of extracting DNA from, I don't know where, I think possibly remains that they have, and they're trying to mix that DNA with other pigeons to recreate the passenger pigeon. I don't think we need more dumb birds flying around, but who knows? I mean, we'll see. So that's, like I said, this year marks the 100-year anniversary of their extinction. So there's been a lot of publicity about passenger pigeons this year. All right, so what else did I do?
Notice you did not say the name, and that would have given it away. I just squinted so that I could see what it said.
Oh yes, on this one?
Is that another technique to use where you don't mention the name of it, you let them just talk about it?
Yeah, especially, so on this one, this is called Bird's Eye View of Passenger Pigeons Nesting. So this would have given it away immediately. On this one, this is sketching on Beavers Creek. This isn't it doesn't give it away as much, I think, on this one. However, that just tends to be my teaching style. And it depends on your group. If I'm taking a group of art historians around, they typically want to know names, dates, titles, things like that. But when I think about a 3rd grade class or a middle school class or even a high school class, they're typically not going to remember who the artist is. They're usually not going to remember if the title is sort of long, especially Bird's Eye View of Passenger Pigeon Nesting. That's a really long title. I think artists don't always think about how long their titles are sometimes. Usually the only time I tell people what the title of a painting is if it's called Untitled. And when it's called Untitled, I usually make them come up with a title because I also think that that's annoying to artists when title works. It makes writing about things real challenging and researching real challenging. Particularly, contemporary artists where their entire body of work is just untitled. It's challenging. So I think it is a technique that I do like to employ. I usually stand in front of chat labels as a gallery teacher to be just real annoying because you always have those people who read the chat label first and then they sort of say, well, I see that this was painted in 1912. Sometimes I think that gives the mystery away just a little bit. But again, it really depends on your group. This tour is developed for K through 12 students. And when you teach with students, you tend to sort of be a little bit more fun and a little bit lax, I guess, in terms of the standard tombstone information that you might give away. What else did I do? Very well.
You're gonna check what we saw, and you're gonna say, oh, well, it's not exactly people bird watching, it's hunting,
Mhm.
but you let the conversation develop and weave in what is supposed to portray, rather than correcting what they think they're seeing.
Sure, and I think that that's a huge part of visual literacy. We had the idea that in this work of art, that this was sunrise. Now, the artist doesn't give us any indication whether it's sunrise or sunset. And there's really no reason to debate the point. I think with visual literacy, the idea here is you see something, and if you can tell me why you believe that that's the case, I think that that's really the point. Visual literacy is the goal there is that through observation, we are training our eyes, we are learning how to really look. And then the part that people don't tend to talk about is that critical thinking element that comes in, because we see millions and millions of images all day long, every single day. And it's that critical thinking that comes in. So, when you saw this and you saw it's gold and it's sunset, and you thought it was sunset because you could tell that on one end of the painting, it was significantly lighter than on this end of the painting. So to you, that signifies sunset. And that's perfectly acceptable because, like I said, the artist doesn't give us any indication. If he had given us an indication of perhaps exactly where this is, or given us some landmark or something like that, that we could tell, okay, yes, this is the east, and that's how we know that it's sunrise versus sunset. But he didn't. So that's really up to your interpretation. There are art historical facts that we can't really deny, such as these are passenger pigeons. Okay, well that's a fact. But there are lots of other things that are subjective, and if you can look at something and you can give me a good indication of why you think that that's else to do?
You waited until, I mean, I know that you know much more about these paintings than you've told us, right?
Mhm.
And,
Let's hope anyway.
but, you know, you really let us unpack at our pace, at our own pace. And it wasn't until, you didn't point things out until one of us said, what about that?
Mhm.
And then you told us a little bit, but you still didn't do a sort of, now we're done and I'm gonna lecture because we need to move on,
Mhm.
you know? Which I think is hard. It's
It
really
is.
hard to do that.
It is, it's tricky. I remember a quote from grad school that I hold on to, and it was about classroom management, group management, teaching in front of a group. And the tagline of the article is really hilarious. It was called, Take Up Smoking. And I asked myself, well, I'm not gonna take up smoking just because I'm gonna be an educator, that's ludicrous. So I'm reading through the article, and the idea here is that something that all educators struggle with is this idea of uncomfortable silence. And it's really only uncomfortable for the person standing in front. It's less uncomfortable for the group. So the idea was to imagine that you are a smoker and you're standing here and you're just waiting. And that's perfectly fine. And the idea is that to formulate a good or thoughtful answer, that people really do need time. You know, they need time, first of all, they need time to look. You know, I don't know if you looked through your packet that they gave you at registration, but TMA's packet that they handed out, the front page says that the average museum goer spends 17 seconds in front of a work of art. I think that is a very inflated number. When I watch people in my museum, I think it's closer to 2 to 3 seconds. You see people do the this through the museum. I just saw 12 works of art, it's great. I mean, that's crazy. So 17 seconds, I challenge you to stand for 17 seconds in front of a work of art today as you're going through the museum here. It's a long time, but so often when we take a group through the museum, we put something up like this and we say, okay, tell me about this. Well, you really need to give people the opportunity to look at it, to digest it, and that's part of visual literacy as well. You know, taking the time to observe something, taking the time to really look very intently. I teach a class for med students who come to the museum, and I make them sit in front of a work of art for 45 minutes and just sit and look until they can't look anymore, and then look some more. And so, yes, taking that time is really important. And then taking the time with each answer is important. Paraphrasing is important. Pointing things out only when people are realizing it. And then going back. So we had the idea that this happened during the fall because the leaves were missing. I sort of went with that because that is a great answer. We are currently going through fall, so that is something that is sticking in all of our minds. If you've been incessantly raking your yard like everybody else in the Midwest has been lately, of course you're going to think that this is fall. It was only later that I revealed that this easily could have been summer, but the pigeons just sort of destroyed the trees, and that's why they look that way. Well, this Art Plus History experience that we created also comes with, it's sort of multifaceted. So we have the Art Plus History, Discover Time and Place Through Art. This is the packet. So teachers get a packet, which has object reports for their classes, as well as some pre and post activities that the teachers can do. And then we also have a completely separate packet for the docents. Are any of you in charge of docent programs at your institutions? No? All right, well I am. So I stand in front of 50 docents 4 times a month. And for a long time, we were giving our docents our teacher packets. And we realized that that just doesn't work because the docents felt as though it was that was their cross to bear. They had to become the teachers in the galleries, and they had to teach, the 20 different curriculum standards that we had listed in the back in the galleries, which is a huge task on an hour-long tour. So that was another change that we made when we pulled Art plus History out of Picture in America. Trying to make it easier on our docents. So now our docents have these 3 objectives that they need to do. And we give them about an hour in the galleries. We let them select 4 to 5 works of art, any works of art that they feel fit into the theme. The only thing we ask is that they do choose at least 1 piece of abstract art so that we can start building that vocabulary as well. What is the difference between representational and abstract? Why would an artist begin to make abstract works of art? And that points to a really nice conversation about the rise of photography, optics, and all that work that was done in the modern era. This tour experience, and we call them experiences at the Grand Rapids Art Museum. This experience ends with a studio activity in our frame studio upstairs, where students create a sort of like a flip book landscape, if you will. So they have a sort of cardstock piece of paper, and then they have 2 pieces of tracing paper over top of it, and they create a fore, middle, and background composition. So they create their background first, and then they flip the paper over, they create their middle ground, and then flip the other paper over and create their foreground. And the idea here is that they get to choose what time and place this happens in, but it has to be sequential. So their background occurs, say, 10 years prior to or before or after their middle sheet, and so on and so on. So as you flip the pages forward, you get sort of this changing landscape. So what a lot of children do is their first sheet of paper, their background, for example, usually tends to be a wooded area or landscape devoid of man. And then their middle sheet, they tend to have maybe just one little house. And their last sheet, they have a whole cityscape or something like that. So they go through this idea of how man over time sort of interacts with their world and the world around them. And that way it sort of ties the whole landscape. Yes?
Is that another view of the pigeons?
This is,
Very
it does,
similar.
so this is, the artist is Louis Lumencross, and this is a second work of art in our collection, which depicts a similar scene. In fact, this one is, in my opinion, better than the other one. The only difference, well, so this one is gigantic, and it's very cool. This one doesn't depict people as well. It only has a couple of people, and they're more sort of specks at the bottom, so it's harder to get at that. Luckily, they just reinstalled our galleries a little bit right next to each other, so they play off of one another really well. This one is very, very good for teaching some of the elements and principles because of the repetition. You can barely make it out, but up here, those are all birds. And it looks as though Louis Lumencross almost created a stamp, like a pigeon stamp, and just stamped all the way across the canvas because they are so perfect, so in line, and so exactly like each one. I'm not sure if that's what he did or not, but that's definitely what it looks like. And each one of those pigeons, they're probably about that big, so you can see them very well, the ones in the background. You can also tell right here where it's curved. It didn't used to be curved, it actually went out like this. So you can see where he took that gold paint and he put it over the pigeon, so you can see just the faint little pimp list that's there still. And so this one is my favorite, it just doesn't work as well for the purposes of this talk today. We have another touring program that we do for all the 3rd graders in Grand Rapids, and they look at passenger pigeons nesting, and I made an executive decision this year that we're not using that one, we're using a big one. Better, and I feel bad for the docents who do hundreds of these tours every year. But yes, good eye. See, we're using our visual literacy to decode and remember the things that we saw previously. have any questions for me? We got through the material really fast. You guys already know about visual literacy, so I don't have to teach you as much.
Do you have other tours that integrate other disciplines in the schools, so not just history or social studies, but other areas?
We do. I'll invite you to go to our website and find out more. We have a program called Language Artists, Creature Connections. That's our 3rd grade program. And that program teaches literacy through art. So we paired up with the Grand Rapids Public School System. And we figured out that these kids in 3rd grade, what they are doing is preparing for the MEAT test, which is a standardized test that every 4th grader in Grand Rapids has to take. And they weren't doing very well. Their literacy skills weren't where they needed to be. So we decided that teaching literacy through art was a win-win. So we created a 6-week curriculum that the kids do in school that is kicked off by a trip to the museum. And at the museum, they focus on 4 skills: description, problem solution, beginning, middle, and end, and compare, contrast. And what they do is they look at a work of art, and in the description phase, for example, which is this work of art, in fact, they are asked to describe. And for 13 minutes, we stand there and we say, describe what's happening here, describe this pigeon, describe the way it feels, describe the way, well, it would feel if you could feel it, describe the way it would sound, describe its feathers, describe its talons, describe the water, describe the sky, any describing word, because when they're writing their essays on this MEAT test, they sort of, on the rubric, they get little tick marks for all the describing words that they use. So big, little, soft, hard, fluffy, watery, slick, whatever they're describing on their test, they need those words, and it can't just be the dog. It has to be the big, scary, fluffy, slimy, slobbery dog, whatever. I don't have a dog, so I can't. I'm not good at describing a dog, but those are things that they really needed help with. So that tour was created to help teach art through literacy. So they come to the museum, they have a 6-week curriculum in school that either the language artist specialist, if they have split up classes, or the main 3rd grade teacher teaches them, and it's every day. Every day they do writing assignments. They look at the works of art on the screen that they saw when they came to the museum, and they do some hunt and find activities with them. They do describing activities, they do writing activities. They'll compare 2 works of art together, and then in the art classroom, they make their own creature, put it in an environment, and then they have to write a compare-contrast between their work of art and this work of art. So it's a very robust program, and we are currently working with the district to expand it to 7th grade, and next year will be the first year where we will have data on these kids. So we think that they're improving, that it's getting better. They seem to, but this year is actually the first year that the district will let us have sort of access to those kids' MEAT scores. And when they get to 7th grade, our first year of 3rd graders that we had will be in 7th grade, so they'll pilot the 7th grade program as well. So the idea here is that they take their MEAT in 4th grade after their 3rd grade program, and then they take another standardized test, I think at the end of 7th grade. And so Art Plus History isn't as robust. Part of the reason for that is that history wasn't as much of a need. It's not emphasized as much, but it was a way that we could sort of integrate social studies curriculum into the art museum as well. Other questions? General questions for me? Yes.
You said something about your website. Is this your website intersection?
This is just a screenshot. The website is artmuseumgr.org. Intersections was the winner of Art Prize, if any of you are familiar with the Art Prize in Grand Rapids. That actually won $300,000.
Was that located at the museum?
Intersections?
Yeah.
Yes.
The installation?
Yep, the installation of Intersections was at the Grand Rapids Art Museum, and it's currently there now. It will be up at least until February. So it's been reinstalled in a different gallery. Anything else? All right, well, it probably works out well because from what I've heard, the conference is sort of tightly scheduled. So if you don't have any questions, that's fine. I suppose everybody probably needs some refreshments and bathroom break before you get on to your next session, but I'll sort of be around here if you have other questions. My card is up here at the front. If you would like to